In the autumn of 1944, Allied bomber crews returning from missions over Germany began reporting something extraordinary and terrifying. They spoke of aircraft that moved unlike anything they had ever encountered, sleek, impossibly fast machines that screamed past their formations at speeds that seemed to defy the laws of physics. These weren't the familiar propeller-driven fighters they had trained to evade. These were jets, and they represented a quantum leap in aerial warfare that threatened to shift the balance of power in the skies over Europe. The Messerschmitt Me 262 Schwalbe, or Swallow, had arrived, and with it came the promise of German air superiority reborn from the ashes of conventional warfare. The Me 262 was nothing short of revolutionary. Powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojet engines, it could reach speeds exceeding 540 miles per hour, nearly 100 miles per hour faster than the best Allied fighters of the time. Its swept-wing design, born from advanced German aerodynamic research, gave it a predatory appearance that matched its lethal capabilities. Armed with 430 million Malawian Kwacha's 108 cannons concentrated in the nose, a single burst from a Me 262 could shred a heavy bomber with devastating efficiency. For the German pilots selected to fly these revolutionary machines, the sensation must have been intoxicating. They had gone from flying obsolete aircraft against numerically superior Allied forces to commanding the most advanced fighter plane in existence. In those early encounters, the jet pilots believed they had been handed the keys to invincibility itself, a weapon so superior that it could single-handedly reverse the tide of the air war. But history has a way of humbling the overconfident, and the story of the Me 262 would become a cautionary tale about technology, tactics, and the adaptability of a determined enemy. The Me 262's journey from concept to combat aircraft was plagued by delays, indecision, and the catastrophic interference of Adolf Hitler himself. German engineers at Messerschmitt had begun work on jet propulsion as early as 1938, recognizing that the future of air combat lay in turbine technology rather than piston engines. By 1942, prototypes were flying, demonstrating performance that left test pilots breathless with excitement. However, the path to operational deployment would be tortuous, hampered by technical challenges with the temperamental early jet engines and, more critically, by Hitler's disastrous strategic meddling. The Führer, obsessed with offensive capability and retaliation for Allied bombing raids, insisted that the Me 262 be developed primarily as a fast bomber rather than the interceptor for which it was ideally suited. This fundamental misunderstanding of the aircraft's strengths cost Germany precious time and resources. Engineers were forced to modify the design to carry bombs, compromising its performance and delaying its introduction as a pure fighter. When the Me 262 finally entered service in significant numbers in late 1944, Germany was already in retreat on all fronts, its fuel supplies dwindling, its industrial capacity shattered by relentless Allied bombing. The jets that should have appeared in 1943, when they might have made a strategic difference, instead arrived too late to alter the war's outcome. Hitler's wonder weapon syndrome, the belief that some technological breakthrough could substitute for sound strategy and adequate resources, had squandered one of Germany's most promising advantages. By the time Me 262 units became operational, they would be fighting not to win the war but merely to survive it, their potential greatness diminished by poor leadership and impossible circumstances. While Germany invested its hopes in revolutionary jet technology, the United States had refined conventional fighter design to near perfection with the North American P-51 Mustang. Initially designed for the British Royal Air Force in 1940, the Mustang evolved into arguably the finest piston-engine fighter of World War II. Its secret weapon was versatility combined with range, capabilities that would prove decisive in the campaign against the Me 262. Powered by the superb Packard-built Merlin engine, the P-51D variant could reach speeds of 440 miles per hour and, more importantly, could escort bombers all the way to Berlin and back, a feat no other Allied fighter could accomplish when the type first appeared. The Mustang represented American industrial might and pragmatic engineering philosophy. While not as fast as the Me-262, it was reliable, relatively easy to maintain, and produced in staggering numbers. Over 15,000 were built during the war. Its 6.50 caliber machine guns delivered formidable firepower, and its long range was achieved through innovative fuel tank design and the use of external drop tanks. By 1944, P-51s had wrested air superiority from the Luftwaffe across Western Europe, decimating German fighter units and allowing American bomber streams to strike targets with increasing impunity. The pilots who flew Mustangs were well-trained, aggressive, and gaining experience with every mission. They had learned to dominate the sky through superior numbers, tactics, and determination. When the Me-262 appeared, these same pilots would need to learn an entirely new kind of warfare, one where speed differentials made traditional dogfighting impossible and where new tactics would need to be invented on the fly. The Mustang pilots' adaptability would be tested as never before. The first encounters between Me-262s and Allied fighters were shocking demonstrations of the jet's raw performance advantage. German jet pilots would approach bomber formations at altitudes and speeds that made interception virtually impossible for escorting fighters. By the time a P-51 pilot spotted a Me-262, the jet would already be making its attack run, diving through the bomber formation with its cannons blazing, then climbing away at a rate that left propeller-driven pursuers hopelessly behind. Some Allied pilots attempted to give chase, pushing their throttles forward in futile pursuit, only to watch the German jets accelerate away as if the Mustangs were standing still. The psychological impact was profound. For the first time since gaining air superiority, Allied airmen felt vulnerable again. Early combat reports make for sobering reading. Me-262 pilots described the experience of combat as almost unfair, with conventional fighters appearing to them as if suspended in midair, helpless targets for their high-speed passes. One German ace compared it to a hawk diving on pigeons. In these initial engagements, several bombers were shot down without their escorting fighters being able to intervene effectively. The Me-262's 30mm cannons were devastatingly effective against the heavy bombers, and even a brief burst could inflict fatal damage. Allied intelligence officers studied gun camera footage and debriefing reports with growing concern. If Germany could produce these jets in sufficient numbers and keep them fueled and maintained, the entire strategic bombing campaign might be jeopardized. Something had to be done, and quickly. American fighter commanders began studying the problem intensively, looking for weaknesses in this seemingly invincible new adversary. The Me-262 pilots, meanwhile, grew increasingly confident with each successful mission, believing themselves untouchable in their technological marvels. For the German pilots selected to fly the Me-262, the experience engendered a dangerous sense of superiority. These were often experienced aces, men who had survived years of brutal aerial combat and had witnessed the gradual erosion of the Luftwaffe's fighting power. Suddenly, they found themselves equipped with an aircraft that restored the advantage they had once enjoyed early in the war. In the cockpit of an Me-262, a skilled pilot felt nearly invulnerable. The sheer speed differential meant that conventional fighters couldn't catch them in level flight, and their acceleration allowed them to dictate the terms of engagement completely, attack when conditions were favorable, disengage at will when they were not. This technological confidence, however, bred complacency. Me-262 pilots developed standardized attack profiles that, while effective, also became predictable. They would typically make high-speed slashing attacks through bomber formations, then zoom climb to regain altitude before setting up another pass. Many became convinced that the Allies simply had no answer to jet aircraft, and that their losses would come primarily from mechanical failures or accidents rather than enemy action. This attitude was reinforced by the jet's impressive early combat record. Some pilots even began taking unnecessary risks, secure in their belief that speed alone would protect them. But warfare is rarely so simple, and the Americans were carefully studying every Me-262 encounter, noting patterns, identifying vulnerabilities, and developing countermeasures. The invincibility complex that gripped many jet pilots would soon be shattered by Allied ingenuity and the harsh reality that every aircraft, regardless of its performance, has moments of vulnerability that a clever enemy can exploit. The Allied response to the Me-262 threat was systematic and thorough, reflecting the organizational advantages that the United States and Britain enjoyed over their increasingly desperate adversary. Intelligence officers compiled detailed reports from every encounter with German jets, creating a comprehensive picture of their capabilities, tactics, and most importantly, their limitations. Reconnaissance aircraft photographed known jet bases, tracking the number of operational aircraft and their deployment patterns. Interrogations of captured German pilots and ground crew provided insights into the jet's maintenance requirements, fuel consumption, and mechanical reliability, or rather, the lack thereof. What emerged from this analysis was a portrait of a weapon system that, while technically superior, was fatally constrained by Germany's collapsing industrial and logistical infrastructure. The Jumo 004 engines were temperamental, requiring replacement after just 25 hours of operation due to the poor quality materials forced upon German industry by Allied blockades. Fuel shortages meant that jets often sat grounded on their airfields, unused. Most critically, intelligence officers identified the fundamental tactical weakness of all jet aircraft of that era. They were vulnerable during takeoff and landing, when their speed advantage evaporated and they became relatively easy targets for conventional fighters. This insight would form the basis of the Allied counter-strategy. Rather than trying to fight Me-262s in the air, where they held every advantage, American fighters would ambush them at their bases, catching them at their most vulnerable moments. This strategy required detailed knowledge of jet airfield locations, flight patterns, and operating schedules. Intelligence that Allied photo reconnaissance and signal intercepts were providing in increasing detail. In early 1945, fighter groups equipped with P-51 Mustangs received new operational directives that represented a significant shift in tactical thinking. Rather than exclusively escorting bombers, Mustang units were now tasked with aggressive fighter sweeps specifically targeting known Me-262 bases. The mission briefings were explicit: patrol the areas around German jet airfields, catch the jets during takeoff or landing, and destroy them when they couldn't use their speed advantage. It was a hunter-killer strategy that played to the Mustang's strengths: endurance, maneuverability at lower speeds, and the sheer numerical advantage that American air power could bring to bear. The pilots selected for these missions understood the stakes and the dangers. Jet bases were heavily defended by anti-aircraft guns, and low-altitude operations in enemy territory always carried significant risks. But the American fighter pilots had proven their skill and courage countless times, and many relished the opportunity to finally have a viable strategy against the jets that had seemed so untouchable. Commanders emphasized the importance of patience and discipline. Pilots would need to loiter in the vicinity of jet bases, sometimes for extended periods, waiting for the moment when Me-262s would be committed to landing, their fuel states critical, their speed reduced, their attention focused on the delicate task of getting their temperamental aircraft safely on the ground. During these missions, P-51 pilots would work in coordinated teams, with some maintaining altitude as top cover against conventional German fighters while others positioned themselves for strikes against landing jets. The tactics were refined through practice and hard-won experience, and gradually, the hunter-killer missions began to show results. The implementation of the airfield attack strategy transformed the dynamic of the jet war. American fighter pilots began dedicating entire missions to prowling near known Me-262 bases, particularly the jet facilities at Alkmaar, Rhine, and Lechfeld. They would arrive in the target area at dawn or dusk, knowing these were prime operating times for the jets, and position themselves at medium altitude where they could observe airfield traffic without being too obvious a presence. When Me-262s were spotted taking off or, more valuably, beginning their landing approach, the Mustangs would strike. The results were dramatic and demoralizing for the German jet units. Me-262 pilots, who had grown accustomed to choosing when and where to fight, now found themselves ambushed at their most helpless moments. Landing a jet aircraft with 1940s technology required intense concentration. The engines were slow to respond to throttle inputs, landing speeds were high, and the aircraft were notoriously unforgiving of pilot error. With Mustangs suddenly diving on them, guns blazing, jet pilots faced impossible choices. Attempting to abort a landing and go around required precious seconds for the engines to spool up, time they often didn't have. Some pilots tried to fight their way clear, only to discover that at low speeds and altitudes, the Me-262's advantages disappeared entirely. The Mustang, optimized for dogfighting, could easily outturn the jets in a landing pattern. Gun camera footage from these engagements shows Me-262's, once the predators of the sky, now as vulnerable as any other aircraft when caught at the wrong moment. The psychological tables had turned. German jet pilots now approached their own airfields with dread, knowing that American fighters might be waiting. The systematic exploitation of the Me-262's landing vulnerability revealed a fundamental truth about aerial warfare. Technological superiority means nothing if you cannot apply it consistently and safely. German jet pilots found themselves trapped by the laws of physics and the operational realities of their aircraft. Every Me-262 mission had to end with a landing, and every landing became a potential death trap. The jet's high fuel consumption meant pilots couldn't afford to circle indefinitely waiting for American fighters to leave the area. They had to land when their fuel state demanded it, regardless of the tactical situation. Allied intelligence had calculated the Me-262's endurance precisely, and Mustang pilots used this knowledge mercilessly. They learned to time their patrols to coincide with the expected return of German jets from missions, positioning themselves to strike when the enemy was most vulnerable. The statistics tell the story. While Me-262's maintained an impressive kill-to-loss ratio in air-to-air combat when they could fight on their own terms, a significant percentage of jet losses occurred on or near airfields, many to the guns of P-51 Mustangs. Some of Germany's most experienced jet pilots fell victim to these ambushes, their expertise and their advanced aircraft unable to save them from the fundamental vulnerability of landing. The German command attempted countermeasures, increased anti-aircraft defenses around jet bases, conventional fighters flying protective patrols during jet landing times, even decoy aircraft to draw off American attackers. But with Germany's resources stretched to breaking point and American numerical superiority overwhelming, these measures proved inadequate. The Me-262, conceived as Germany's salvation in the air, had become a target. By March 1945, the operational situation for German jet units had deteriorated to the point of near collapse. Chronic fuel shortages meant that jets sat grounded for days at a time, their pilots waiting helplessly for precious aviation gasoline that never arrived. When fuel was available, it was often of such poor quality that engine failures became routine. The maintenance burden of keeping the temperamental jets flying had become overwhelming. Each hour of flight time required 30 to 40 hours of maintenance, and spare parts were increasingly unavailable. Airfields themselves were under constant attack, not just from prowling fighters but from Allied bombers that specifically targeted jet bases, cratering runways, and destroying ground support facilities. The desperation was palpable in German operational records from this period. Jet units were being relocated constantly, shuttling between bases to escape Allied attacks, but this mobility came at enormous cost in terms of lost maintenance capability and operational efficiency. Pilot training suffered catastrophically. The fuel situation meant that new jet pilots often received minimal transition training before being thrown into combat, and the accident rate soared. Some Me-262's were lost to simple pilot error, inexperienced aviators unable to master the jet's demanding handling characteristics. Others fell victim to engine failures, the Jumo turbojets flaming out or catching fire at critical moments. And an increasing number were destroyed by American fighters, particularly P-51s that had become expert jet hunters. The statistics make grim reading. Of the approximately 1,400 Me-262's produced, Only about 200 were ever operational simultaneously, and combat losses plus accidents destroyed them faster than they could be replaced. The wonder weapon had become a wasting asset, its potential squandered by poor planning, inadequate support infrastructure, and an enemy that had learned to counter its strengths by exploiting its weaknesses. When the guns finally fell silent in May 1945, the ledger of Me-262 operations presented a complex picture that defied simple interpretation. German records credited jet units with destroying approximately 542 Allied aircraft, though Allied records suggest the actual figure was somewhat lower, perhaps 300 to 350 confirmed losses. Against this, the Germans lost somewhere between 100 to 200 Me-262s to all causes in air combat, with many more destroyed on the ground or lost to accidents. On paper, this kill-to-loss ratio appears favorable for the jets, but these numbers tell only part of the story and obscure the larger strategic failure. The Me-262 never achieved what it was meant to accomplish. It did not stop the Allied strategic bombing campaign, it did not regain air superiority for Germany, and it did not change the war's outcome. The P-51 Mustang pilots who learned to hunt jets had played a crucial role in containing the threat. Through aggressive airfield attacks and patient ambush tactics, they had negated much of the Me-262's technical advantage, proving that superior technology without adequate support, sufficient numbers, and sound strategy is ultimately insufficient. The mutual respect between adversaries that developed during this campaign was remarkable. American pilots acknowledged the Me-262's revolutionary design and the skill of its pilots, while German jet pilots grudgingly admitted that the Americans had found effective countermeasures to seemingly uncounterable technology. The jet age had arrived, but its first chapter had been written not as a story of technological determinism but as a reminder that warfare remains a human endeavor where adaptability, resource management, and tactical innovation matter as much as engineering excellence. The Me-262 versus P-51 Mustang confrontation stands as one of aviation history's most significant transitional moments, marking the bridge between propeller-driven and jet-powered aerial warfare. In the immediate post-war period, both the United States and Soviet Union eagerly studied captured Me-262s, incorporating lessons learned into their own jet fighter programs. The swept-wing design, the twin-engine layout, even the tactical problems associated with early jet operations, all of these would inform the next generation of military aircraft. The F-86 Sabre and MiG-15, which would face each other over Korea just 5 years later, were direct descendants of the technologies pioneered by German engineers and the tactical lessons learned in the skies over Germany in 1945. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of this brief aerial campaign is the lesson it teaches about the relationship between technology and warfare. The Me-262 was genuinely revolutionary, a quantum leap ahead of its contemporaries in raw performance. Yet it failed to achieve its strategic objectives because technology alone cannot win wars. The Mustang pilots who learned to hunt jets demonstrated that tactical innovation, numerical superiority, superior logistics, and adaptability can overcome even significant technological disadvantages. Modern air forces have absorbed this lesson thoroughly. Advanced aircraft are essential, but they must be supported by robust training programs, adequate maintenance infrastructure, sufficient fuel and munitions, and most critically, sound operational strategy. The ghosts of those Me-262 pilots who thought they ruled the sky still whisper their warning to military planners. Brilliance in engineering must be matched by wisdom in employment. The Mustang pilots who hunted them proved that no weapon system is truly invincible, and that human ingenuity, when faced with a seemingly insurmountable challenge, will find the weakness and exploit it. In the end, the sky belonged not to those with the fastest aircraft, but to those who used what they had most effectively.